The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network.
Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to Minnesota-based novelist William Kent Krueger. His latest book is Windigo Island, which continues the adventures of private investigator Cork O'Connor. This is Kent's third visit to the show. Stick around. At the end of today's episode, Krueger will receive a Man of the Year award from the Duluth Chamber of Commerce. Don't miss it. So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview, brought to you by Amazon.com, Audible.com, and 1-800-DIAL-DJs. Please stop by the website, MrMedia.com, click on our advertisers, support the show. And remember, there's more than 1,000 interviews available at MrMedia.com. We've been doing this since February 2007. Hope you'll find something you like. And thanks for listening. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of people who can't wait for the climactic battle between William Kent Krueger's Windigo and Michael Chabon's Golem in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. A good day in my business is one in which I learn that a favorite author has released a new book. That means good reading ahead and, more than likely, a good interview in my immediate future. Today is one of those days. As one of the Great Lakes' favorite sons of modern literature, William Kent Krueger is joining me to talk about his latest Cork O'Connor mystery, Windigo Island. As always, the gentle writing style of Krueger belies a dirty underbelly of statutory misdeeds, and this is one of his darkest tales yet, teen sex trafficking of Native American girls. It's a story that is often hard to read for the unfolding brutality of its crimes, but while the narrative is never as sexually graphic as it might have been in a lesser author's hands, Krueger is never less than commanding in his point of view and its effectiveness. Now, this will be viewed as a kind of a hard right turn in content for readers of his last novel, the non-Cork O'Connor story, Ordinary Grace, which was actually an extraordinary piece of grace. And no, William Kent Krueger will not be receiving a Man of the Year commendation from the Duluth Chamber of Commerce for Windigo Island. In fact, I suspect he may want to go in disguise next time he pays a visit to that lakefront city. This, by the way, is Krueger's third visit to Mr. Media, and I hope there are many more ahead of us. William Kent Krueger, welcome back to Mr. Media. Ken, are you there?
It's good to be back, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I thought we lost our audio for a second. So, going into one of your stories, my biggest worry is always about something bad happening to a member of the O'Connor clan. And that kind of became the least of my concerns as I saw where you were going with the teen sex trafficking this time.
Yeah. Well, very often, one of the things that you have to do in order to maintain suspense in the kind of books that I write is put people in jeopardy that the readers care about. And for those who followed the saga of the Cork O'Connor clan, they know that very often I've used Cork's family to that end. And it's been very effective. But this was a story that really wasn't about Cork and his family so much as it was about an issue that was important to me and is important in the Native community here in Minnesota. So I wanted to focus on those, that culture and those people who are most affected by that particular issue at the moment. That said, there's Cork's daughter Jenny plays a very important role in this story, particularly in terms of how her own eyes are opened to her heritage as someone who's part of Ojibwe and her responsibility as a woman.
And she becomes kind of the conscience of the story. It's always, are we doing the right thing? Dad, are you doing the right thing? Are you doing anything? She's constantly driving the narrative forward at points at which we think Cork is maybe thinking, I may be in over my head here. This may not be quite where I need to go.
Yeah, when you're writing a story, and the heart of any good story is conflict. And one of the things that I thought I might be able to accomplish with this is to have some of the conflict be between Cork and his daughter, who see the world in different ways. And I thought if you followed the narrative, we shift from Cork's point of view, really, in the middle of the novel is all Jenny's point of view, and then we shift back to Cork. And I did that so that the reader could see Cork from a different perspective, and so that the reader could get closer to the whole issue of something terrible that really affects women. Cork couldn't see it in the same way as Jenny, but it did offer that opportunity for Cork and Jenny to butt heads and to talk about their different views of the world, and to give the reader a different view of Cork, because he's seen from his daughter's point of view through her eyes.
Yeah, it was very different. I mean, yeah, it was nice to see her not necessarily in jeopardy. For one of the kids was not in jeopardy, and yet, we see that she sees her dad. There's been one way that she's always seen her dad. She sees him a little differently, actually being out on a case with him. I mean, I kind of wonder if we'll see more of her out with him in the future. I mean, she's kind of a good foil for him.
Yeah, I liked the part that she played in the story. I have one more Cork O'Connor novel under contract, and I haven't even begun to think about that novel yet, Bob. I'm currently working on the companion novel to Ordinary Grace.
Oh, excellent.
And after that, I'll tackle the final Cork novel in my current contract. It won't be the final Cork novel, but it'll be the final one in this particular contract. But I have no idea what that's going to be at this point.
Got it. All right. I can see a media guy coming into town and causing an uproar. Perhaps
some media guy out of Florida, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Cork gets really fed up with his questions and just quietly does him in, and it becomes the Jenny O'Connor mysteries because Cork winds up in jail. But that's just me. That's just me thinking out loud.
That's why I write the series.
Yeah, that is why. So let me ask you this. So I am down in Florida. Down here, we've got the Seminole tribe, and most of what we hear about the Seminole tribes has to do with casinos and gambling and all that kind of thing.
They're kind of the premier native group in terms of how to create and manage a viable casino.
Oh yeah, I mean they've really changed their entire careers, the trajectory of the tribe. But the reason I ask is I had no idea. I have no idea outside of reading Windigo Island that the sex trafficking is a major issue on reservations in Minnesota, North Dakota. I assume you would not have written something about this if you didn't see this going on, but I mean, probably the rest of us have no idea.
I really didn't become aware of it as a significant problem until I began to work with various native organizations here in the Twin Cities. Began working with an organization called the Enda Young Center in St. Paul, and an organization in Minneapolis called the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center. And these are organizations that help both Native youths on the street and Native women who are in extreme situations. They help them out in all kinds. They save their lives, really, is what they do in the end. But when I began to work with these folks, that's when I became aware of what an enormous problem the trafficking of vulnerable Native women is. But the truth is, it cuts across all cultures. In minority groups particularly, they tend to be preyed upon heavily, vulnerable women. And at some point in my discussion with these folks, the question arose, because I am pretty representative of the white population in my ignorance, the question arose, Kent, is there a way that you might be able to create a story that would help broaden awareness of this really horrific situation? Once that question arose, how could I say no?
So not only was this brought to your attention, but you were encouraged to write about it. It wasn't, you decided to write about it, and now you're having to deal with the after effect. This was something people wanted to hear from you.
The response to it has just been amazing. People's eyes have been open. And even though it's a dark story, it's a compelling story. And so when I'm hoping that that readers, when they hit the end of it, not only have had all of the things they expect me to offer in a really good suspenseful novel, but they will have been enlightened in a way that maybe will help us in the end get this problem addressed and the situation changed. I have great hope in that one. Not just because of my novel, but because of the way the Native community is really working hard to make an awareness of this.
Now, what made you think that this was an apt subject for Cork O'Connor versus to do a separate story, like Ordinary Grace type of thing, where it's outside of that type of continuity? I mean, this is a big topic.
Yeah, it is. It's an important topic. But I've dealt with issues in other books, important issues in other books. I've dealt with how we treat our runaways, the children who we turn our backs on and close our doors against, who are eventually lost to us. I've dealt with the whole question of violence. Why does violence exist in our culture? Why is it perpetuated? Why do we pass it down one generation to the next as a cultural norm without really acknowledging that? So I've tackled some pretty big questions in the past. This one was just. This is probably the most issue-oriented book that I've written. But of course, it's perfect for a Cork O'Connor novel. Cork is part Ojibwe. His home is up where the Ojibwe's influence has been enormous. Their influence is ubiquitous up there. Of course, it's a perfect venue to talk about this kind of issue, I thought.
Cork is very careful in this book dealing with this in terms of he comes to realize that the authorities in certain places are in on it. And so he can't. I mean, he's a private investigator at this point. He's no longer a cop. He's very careful about where he crosses the street, But I don't know. It just seemed like a really big thing to undertake, and it seems like Cork at times in the story is thinking, maybe this is too much. Maybe I shouldn't. I can't go all Rambo on a trafficking ring.
If you look at the story, it's a broad issue, huge issue, but it's the story of a few people trying to save one girl. Mm-hmm. And in the end, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to save one girl. And at the end of the novel, if you remember Cork's ruminations on what's occurred, what he realizes is that he can't save them all. He can't save them all. And so in his own mind, that's sort of a failure on his part. But that's what, at the end of the book, leaves the door open for all the rest of us. How do we save these children who continue to be vulnerable? And what do we do? And it's a question that's really much larger than Cork, much larger than the Native community. It's really something that all of us need to look at together. Because white girls are trafficked, because Somali girls are trafficked, because Hmong girls are trafficked, because the Native women and children on reservations all across the United States are involved in this situation. It's a huge problem. And when I discovered what a huge problem it was in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, nice. We have a great humanitarian culture here, we believe, and yet it's an urban area that is rife with that kind of trafficking. And Duluth. And Duluth.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting to. I mean, you were encouraged to deal with the topic, and you did, and it's a really good read. But have you taken any heat on the flip side of that for exposing this in some way?
I haven't yet, but the novel isn't even really officially out yet. It's not officially been published.
Okay.
When that happens, it'll be interesting to see. But I had to walk a pretty careful line there, because I talked to the Native community and I heard all kinds of horrific stories about the trafficking of women on the freighters in Duluth Harbor. And when I talked to the authorities said, well, we have heard these stories too, but we have not found anything that will validate those stories for us. So sort of like, how do I write a story where I really can't get corroboration from the authorities, but I'm hearing all of these detailed, heart-rending stories from the Native community. So that was probably the most difficult juggling act I did in the writing of the story. I didn't want to piss off the cops. I wanted to give credence to the stories that I heard from the Native community and how to do that.
Well, I joked earlier about the Duluth Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure they haven't seen the book yet, but I can't imagine that the chamber, the mayor, people like that, economic development people, they're going to be they're not going to be too thrilled with this book, I'm thinking.
But it's a problem they're aware of. Chuck Frederickson, one of the guys who writes a column up in Duluth, on Sunday did a column on sex trafficking, and he interviewed me for that column. So, they're aware of it.
Okay. And what about you not this is not the only big topic you take on. You also there's a point where the book kind of shifts a little bit location. You wind up in North Dakota, and you're dealing with fracking on top of everything else. I mean, holy cow.
Yeah.
I'm
going to make a lot of enterprises angry at me as a result of this book. No, the trail that I followed is one that unfortunately exists. Women who are recruited here are trafficked all the way out. They're trafficked everywhere, but much of the trafficking these days occurs out in Williston, where you've got this huge boom because of the Bakken Formation and all the oil wells that are now being drilled, and all the men, and it's primarily men that are going out there to do this, and they've got they're making money hand over fist. It's a desolate area, really, if you're looking for any kind of fun to have, and so women are out there being taken out there to provide quote entertainment for these guys, and they're very often just girls, just kids. So yeah, that's I took on the oil industry too. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean, reading this book and finishing this book up, and then the Ferguson, Missouri thing happens, and you start thinking that parts of the United States are just as lawless as any part of the Middle East or Eastern Europe, and it's kind of frightening. I mean,
well, I think we fool ourselves into believing that we have laws and we have a society and all of that, but there are times and there are places where that just falls apart. Still, it's human nature.
What have you had any people? And again, I realize we're talking a little before the release of the actual book, so it may be hard to answer this. But do you worry that people may look at this and go, you've tackled a lot of things in this series, but isn't it time to just let Cork trip upon a dead body and let him solve a mystery of somebody dying and back off a little bit? And don't get me wrong, I thought the book was great. I really enjoyed it. But I imagine there's people who don't want their lives that complicated.
And there are lots of books out there they can read if that's what they want. That's not typically what I offer. Mm-hmm. I really do think that the mysteries that I enjoy are the ones that ask the deeper questions. And that's the kind of mystery I write.
You mentioned, of course, that Cork and his family are a part of Ojibwe, and I wondered if, and because you do write about life on the reservation in Minnesota, but have you found that you've developed a following on the reservations, or do you have a lot of Native Americans who are reading you that you hear about?
Yeah. Not as many as I have white people reading me.
All right.
But I know there are a significant number of Ojibwe readers out there who do appreciate my work, and I hear from them, and it's very nice.
And do they respond and say, "Hey, I recognize this," or "Hey, you should maybe look into this," or what kind of feedback do you get?
Typically, the response deals with an appreciation for the way in which I present the Ojibwe culture and the Ojibwe people. And very often they'll talk about, this character reminded me of an elder in our community, or this is an issue that we tackled in our community. So it's really generally speaking, a connected sort of a communication.
And I want to change topics briefly before we come close to wrapping up. Um, Ordinary Grace, as I said, was really an extraordinary book. I mean, it was just
Thank you.
I got to the end of it and I was like, wow. And I do want to ask you about the companion book for it. Um, has it changed you or your writing or the perception of people towards your writing or the trajectory of your career? Has anything changed because of it?
It's opened a lot of doors that weren't open to me before. It's the success of Ordinary Grace is what allows me now to think about doing other things besides the Cork O'Connor novels. I love Cork O'Connor. At this point, have no intention of ever not writing the Cork O'Connor series. But not every story I want to write is a Cork O'Connor story. When I did Ordinary Grace, it wasn't under contract. I had no certainty that anybody would be interested in it. It was a story that I was compelled to write. Its success, I mean, it's won so many awards. It's on track now to outsell any individual Cork O'Connor novel. And in the end, it may outsell my whole oeuvre. It's being chosen as a one community, one book read across the country. So it's giving the reading public a greater awareness of my work. And it's also bringing lots of folks who wouldn't typically read a mystery, my Cork O'Connor series, which is what I'd hoped to be doing.
And what, if anything, can you tell us about this companion book that you're working on?
Yeah, I call it a companion because it's not a sequel. It doesn't deal with the Drum family in New Bremen, Minnesota. But it's a companion in that it is also set in southern Minnesota as compared to the Cork O'Connor series, which takes place in the Great North Woods. And it is set in an earlier time. Ordinary Grace takes place in 1961. This book takes place in 1958. And really it deals a lot with one of the issues that I just scratched the surface of in Ordinary Grace was the effect that World War II and the Korean War had on our fathers, the fathers of the people I grew up with. My father was a veteran of World War II. Many of my friends' fathers also fought in that war or the Korean conflict. And these were men who went away boys, and they came back dramatically changed by that experience. And so this Tender Land talks about the men who came back from those wars, having seen and done horrific things that they simply would not talk about. So I'm talking about war. The history of southern Minnesota is a history of warfare that echoed the conflict, just tore people apart down there in 1862. And so I wanted to talk about all this wounding that takes place, all the wars that we fight, and how as human beings, how as individuals, how as a people, do we heal ourselves? That's kind of the question.
And did I hear you mention a title in there, this Tender Land?
This Tender Land.
Nice. And is that scheduled for publication yet, or is it too soon?
Yeah, at the moment we're looking at the spring of 2016. So it'll be a year and a half between books this time around.
Wow.
And I asked for that. I asked for a little extra time because I toured for 2 books last year.
Yeah.
I worked my ass off. So I wanted a bit of a break, and they were my publisher was very understanding and giving me a little extra time.
Very nice. And on the Cork O'Connor series, wrapping up your contract there, are there talks underway? What's do you want to stay where you're at? Do you want to see what it's worth out in the open market? What's the thinking?
I'm so happy with Simon & Schuster, Atria Books, my imprint. I love the team there that puts together the actual product that you, the reader, sees. I have great relationship with my editor, my publicist. So at the moment, I have no plans to jump ship. We have a really good relationship. But that's still down the way a bit. I have no idea. We're talking now about 2 years away before we even begin negotiations, probably for another contract. God only knows what the world is going to be like then, Bob. So we'll see. All
right. And Atria, I mean, I usually don't mention a publisher by name, but boy, they have some really good books. Whoever's picking their books has really got an eye.
They have a terrific staff at every level. The acquiring editors, you're absolutely right, have a great eye. So we have just a fine stable of authors working in Atria. All of the people who are actually involved in the design of the book are just the best that are out there. And my publicist, David Brown, I couldn't ask for a better guy. You work with Dave.
I've known him a long time. He's a good guy. Maybe we shouldn't mention that publicly. He'll want more money. Not from
Well,
me
he
or
probably
you, but
deserves more money.
well, okay, all right. Well, folks, listen. You can find the latest Cork O'Connor mystery, Windigo Island, in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. And you know how this works if you watch the show. If you're looking at this video on MrMedia.com, somewhere beneath the video, you'll see a copy of the book, you see the cover. Click on it now. Amazon can get it to you via drone in about 30 minutes or less, faster than pizza here. Or you can get it as an ebook, or they can send it to you traditionally in a day or two. Order it; it's a really good read. And while you're at it, while you're on there ordering books, get a copy of Ordinary Grace, because it is a phenomenal piece of work as well.
Thank you, Bob.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I've given away. You know I'm a fan. There's no doubting it there. Is there a website you want to send people to, Kent?
Yeah, my website is www.williamkentkrueger.com. I also have a Facebook page. As I do my tour this time around, I'm posting daily about the events and what I'm experiencing and all of that. So it'll be a fun road trip, I think.
Excellent. Well, Kent, William Kent Krueger, for those of you who like the formality. Always a pleasure to have you. I'm sorry it's going to be another year and a half or more before we get another book from you, but I hope you'll come back. And as always, thanks for joining us, Mr. Media, today.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Getting restless.